All right, well, good morning, everybody. We would like to welcome you to our second progress report. We are Team 3, Water Irrigation and Crop Selection for South Texas, and my name is Ramon Pimentel. Now, looking at the overview of the presentation, we'll be looking at the problem summary. We'll be looking at what we did in our faculty meeting with Dr. Kingman. We'll be looking at the flow analysis, the potential solutions, the decision matrix, the selection analysis, as well as our future steps. Now, problem summary. When looking at the problem summary, we would like to remind you that we're working with 100 acres of land in Aguilares, Texas, where we have poor soil conditions as well as poor environment conditions. Our goal is to select the best cash crop that will yield the highest returns, as well as the best irrigation method, pertaining to the situation with the low access of water that we have. Next, we would have to determine the source of irrigation water, as well as the source of energy, whether it be a diesel generator or solar power. In our faculty meeting, it'll be talked about later on by the group, but the main points that were hit were the different types of irrigation methods, the crop selection, energy sources, as well as the problem complexity. And as you can see here, this is we were lucky enough to do an in-person meeting, and this is the image that was taken. Now, flow analysis and items that flow through the system. Here we have crops, water, equipment, service, source of power, and laborers. And we can see how some of them will flow into the system and only some of them will flow out. Now, let's get into depth with crops. In crops, we have corn, we have cotton, we have milo. An example of how one of these crops would flow through the system can be seen with cotton. Now, with cotton, the seeds would have to be obtained. They would have to be planted. They would have to be watered and fertilized, and then they would have to be harvested, collected, and sold for profit. This is how a cotton seed or a cotton crop would flow through the system. Next, we will look at water. Now, water will have to be pumped out of the source, obtained from the source, and transported to a treatment area, where it will be treated and then transported again to be irrigated onto the crops so that the crops can be later collected and sold for profit. Now, when looking at the equipment, we can be talking about pipes, harvesting equipment, excavation equipment, or drip tape. Using drip tape as an example of how it would flow through the system, we would have to buy the drip tape, measure it, maintain it, and set it up on the 100 acres of land in order to get it to work in through the system. Now, services that we're potentially looking at could be excavation services or harvesting services. Since we potentially don't have the best access to harvesting machinery, then a harvesting service could be used as a cheaper solution to harvest the crops. As a source of power, we could be looking at solar power panels, solar powered systems, as well as the diesel generators. And an example of how sunlight would flow through the system would be that it would be collected by a solar power system to power up the irrigation system so that the crops can be water pumped and transported. And the laborers, they would have to be walked through the whole setup. They would have to be taught how everything works. They would have to maintain the crops as well as the systems, and they would have to potentially help take care of the equipment as well as collect and harvest the crops. Now here we see two flow analysis examples. We can see how the cotton flows through the system. We have to obtain the seed, plant the seed, water the plant, maintain it, harvest it, and profit off of it by collecting it and selling it. And we can see a water flowing through the system as well, in which we have to obtain it from the source, transport it, treat it, transport it again so it can be irrigated onto the crops.
All right, my name is Jason. And I'm going to be talking about some of our potential solutions for our project. As you know, and it's already been discussed, it's a complex project that's going to require us to make multiple decisions, which means there are going to be multiple potential solutions. Now, one of these is the source of our irrigation water. As we've mentioned before previously in our last progress report, there's a stock tank next to the field. It can be used, the water out of that stock tank is rainwater that's collected throughout the year. That can be used for irrigation. We also have the option to drill a well and to pump water out of that well, or we can use both. Now, the best option so far looking at it is to use both and use the well to pump the water up, filter it out, use a stock tank to hold that water, and then later on you pump it out of the stock tank to irrigate with. Another one of these is our solution, or source of energy. Now, we're down there, South Texas. There's no electricity available. To get electricity to our field to run our irrigation equipment and our pumps, that's going to cost a lot of money. So we really have to go with a source of energy that's going to be independent right there next to the field. And so we really only have two good options for that, and that's going to be solar or a diesel generator. Now, looking at these two, solar, it's going to require things such as a battery bank and everything to store energy to irrigate at night or whatever we choose to do. And then a diesel generator requires fuel. It's going to require probably a lot more service to maintain it, keep it up in shape. And the diesel generator is actually looking somewhat to be the better option in this situation because everything down there is run by diesel generators. That's already known. It's already established. I mean, the people already know what they're doing with them. They know how to work on them, maintain them, how to control them. It's something that's already there, easy to continue to just add one more generator to the range. One of the other problems that we have to have a solution for is our irrigation system. Now, when we met with Dr. Keenan, this was one of our main things that we talked about. He has a lot of knowledge with irrigation and equipment with that. And he told us there's really two types of irrigation. There's above ground and there's underground. He said for our situation that we have with the climate, the temperature, the wind, he said above ground is not the route you want to go in the situation. He said if you use anything above ground, such as a pivot, sprinklers, anything like that, you're going to have probably close to around 50% loss in your water. Now, if you irrigated at night, that would still be less, but during the summer, you're still going to lose some to evaporation and other things. So he said underground is the best option to go with. And when we were discussing it with him, he told us drip tape is the way that we should go. He said you drip tape, minimal loss. It's underground. You're not going to really lose much to evaporation. It's just going straight to the roots of the plant. Now, this drip tape, a big decision would be the depth to put the strip tape in. You can put it at whatever depth you want to, really. We're working with about 2 to 3 feet before we hit a clay bottom pan to our soil. And that also goes into our type of crop we select because our depth of our roots is very important in this situation. You want that drip tape very close to the roots so they can access the water easily. We don't want to put it too deep. The roots aren't going to be able to get it really before it goes down to that clay bottom pan and runs it along the ground. And you don't want it too shallow because we would like to try to find a solution where the drip tape is at the right depth that you can come in, plow up your harvested crop, and not plow out the strip tape, depending on how deep you put it. If you put it only 4 inches in the ground, you're going to plow it out. You got to put a whole new set of drip tapes in the field the next year. So we would like to try to find the right depth with the right roots for our crop where the water is still accessible, but it's deep enough that we don't plow it out every year. Now our main decision we have to make is our potential crop. And there's a lot of qualities that have to be considered. These are some of the qualities that we found to be most important. And that's going to be the required amount of water. Obviously, it is in South Texas, not a lot of water available, even with the irrigation. So we need a crop that's going to require a low amount of water. Now, the crops that we have listed here is some of our potential solutions for our crops that we're considering. They all take on average to 15 to 28 inches of water per year to grow. Now, some of these crops, such as wheat and milo, actually like periods of drought during their growth stages. They want those periods of drought. It helps them along. They don't want to be in water all the time. They don't like it. They like periods of drought when they're growing. It's better for them. Another thing that's very important is the growth period. Like we stated in our last progress report, most of the rain comes in the spring or in the fall. You're not going to get a lot during the summer. So our growth period needs to be short. It needs to be, try not to be really more than 4 or 5 months long at the most. And it needs to try to fit into one of those, either the spring or the fall, to try to get to maximize the potential for the rainwater that we're going to receive. And most of these crops, 3, 5 months, that's the average of these crops for their growing period. Another important thing, like I've already discussed in the irrigation section, is the root depth. It matters. Most of these are ranging from 4 inches down to 8 to 10 inches in their root depth. That's something that's very important when it comes to, depending on what crop we select, that's going to depend on where we can put our drip tape in the ground to determine if it's going to be only a one use or if we can use it multiple years in a row. And then obviously the cost for these different crops, that's going to be important, and the fertilizer requirements of these crops. Now, they all require different types of fertilizer, different, obviously nitrogen being the most important, but they all require different applications of that fertilizer, spraying, dry blends, whatever it may be. And that's something that we also took into consideration when trying to analyze these potential solutions.
There you go. I'm Colin, and I have the portion of the decision matrix. And from the 5 crops that we had, looking at the decision matrix, we categorized them as previously stated: the water amount, the root depth, amount of nitrogen that we focused on, importantly, growing period, and then process. And then as we look at it, you can see that you have all of them in here categorized as the one being the least amount that it pertains to that category, to 5 the highest amount. And as we go through some of these, we would look at the charts, and so for the weight, you would multiply the factor here, and then you add up all the totals to get the weighted total. And as you can see, sesame and wheat are kind of one of the higher factors that you can consider. The decision matrix is used to push towards your decision, but not into making your decision, kind of guide you toward it. And when we're mainly focused on nitrogen for the fertilization, just because nitrogen plays a key factor in the fertilizing the crops as a soil or for the plant growth. But when we looked at all of this, sesame and onion had the least amount of water required, since water is one of our biggest problems out there to focus on. And then also our growing period, a bigger factor, as showing milo and sesame would be kind of one of the top rankings because the growing period is shorter for them in that 3 to 5 month time span. And,
Howdy y'all, I'm Jared, and my part is the selection analysis part of the project. I just pay for the flow analysis. For what Colin just said, the top three crops from that decision matrix for the sesame, the onions, and the winter wheat in that order. But as Colin said, I want to emphasize that decision matrix will not be used specifically just to come up with our solution. There are other things that the decision matrix can't possibly take into consideration. I'll go over that in just a second. So one thing we might consider with these crops here that we've shown is we might go with one of these crops as we further analyze them per year and just do one season grow, one growing season per year. And then 2, we could also look into doing a crop rotation even the same year, or even 2 crops at the same time, doing more like a strip farming. Those are options that we had with these crops that came out highest. And so to continue off that point that I made about the decision matrix and its inability to cover all the different things that affect this project, is there are added crop benefits to some of these crops. So for example, the wheat and the oats. So the winter wheat was one of those high ranking crops. Let's say something happened at a major catastrophic event or something environmentally happened where we weren't able to harvest the wheat as we wanted to. We could go through and bale that wheat or bale that oats and make hay and we get nickels on the dollar of what we were looking for, but it is something as far as risk is concerned, that we would be able to salvage something there. The other thing is with the onions, we would have to be very cognizant of everything that we do with that, because that would be something for human consumption. Some of the other crops we would use might not be for human consumption, more for animal consumption, and so there wouldn't be as much regulation there, not as much headache there as the onions. So as we conclude, some of the things we talked about here was the flow analysis, things going in and out of this project, as Ramon talked about, everything from the water to the energy, the crops. And then from there we moved on to potential solutions, as Jason talked about. We have to come to a solution on how we will access water, what water we will use. Jason talked about that. He also talked about how we're leaning towards diesel over solar for energy out there. And then we even got into the crop aspect, and Jason talked a little bit about that, and Colin talked about it more with the decision matrix and how we will come to a decision on what crop we will use there. Going forward, the next part of this project, we will have to come up with one recommended solution, and then we will make an economic analysis on this to make sure that we cover not only the investment cost, but also the operational cost of that solution, and really take it down and see what this will make for our client, how this will be for our client financially. In addition to this, in order to come up with those ideas, we are going to have a meeting with an agronomist that's going to go over evaluating that soil test that we have and figuring out how exactly we're going to fertilize this crop and what that's going to cost, as well as meeting with our faculty advisor again, having a follow-up meeting and going over more of specifically what crops we're going to go on with this project. And then, last but not least, the progress report, the next progress report back in here when we come up with all of those things. And we will now have a question time.
Okay, Mr. Rainey, do you have any questions? You guys can all kind of stand over here together.
Yeah, I had a question about the winter wheat especially. So is it possible then to farm pretty close to year round, because the winter wheat is in a different growing season than the onions and the sesame, or is there overlap where you can't do that?
That's something that we were looking at in our crop rotation. Obviously, we're going to try to come up with a crop rotation that's going to work best. And that's something we were running into. Wheat and oats compared to these other crops is planted in the fall and then harvested in the spring. And that kind of runs into an issue because the rest of these crops are planted in the spring. So if you were planting wheat or oats and you wanted to follow it with sesame or milo, you're going to have an issue there. You're going to have your crop still in the field when you're wanting to plant your milo or your sesame. So then we were looking at, well, what if we tried a three-way rotation? And that helped in some ways, but that also left a long period of time where you wouldn't have a crop in the field, potentially like 7 to 8 months where you wouldn't have one out there. So it does have the chance that you could have a crop out there almost year round, but then we were thinking about that and going, well, that's pretty rough on the ground. That's going to require a lot of water. And then say you harvested your wheat in May, and then you follow it right up with some sesame and you plant it out there. Well, that sesame is growing in the summer. It likes hot temperatures and little water, but then we're not going to have a lot of water. We've already used a lot of irrigated water when we were growing the wheat, and then now
Okay, so
a lot left.
yeah, you've thought this through, so that's kind of why I've asked the question. That's a good answer. On the drip tape, you might want to consider if the drip tape itself is a consumable. You can buy thousands of feet of it for $100. And so that's one of the things, well, if you do tear it up, maybe you just put it in your cost of operations that every year you buy more drip tape. That's just something to consider when you start looking at your costs.
Yes, sir. And
That's the only comments I had was that comment and that one question. Otherwise, I liked it. It was good.
Thank you, Bill. All right, let's have the team 4. You make your comments, please, and questions. I need 4 questions or comments or both.
I was gonna say I liked how minimal the slides were. It was really easy to follow. Not a lot of cluster information to get confused in.
Okay, another one?
Yeah, I liked how they based like the main information was on the slides. I would have maybe add some images so it didn't look all like information, but the information was pretty good, and the presenting skills like from the team were also really good.
I had 2 comments on the decision matrix. So I just wanted a little bit of clarification. For water amount, was a high number like using a lot of water, or was it using not a lot of water?
The high number was a little amount of water.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
by being still categorized as Tsz-Yi, there's little amount of water compared to oats where they do require a lot more water, say about 25 inches of rainwater per year.
Okay, and the other question is, has this led to like a decision yet? Because I see like nothing is like highlighted as like the best decision yet, or is this just still like in the works?
In the works of it, we're going to talk to the agronomist on kind of reading that chart and kind of once reading that chart, familiarizing it, it'll help us narrow it down to application-wise of nitrogen, that's a big factor, phosphates, other fertilization to help narrow down our decision to crops as a rotation.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, that's pretty good. Let me make some comments if you don't mind, Dr. Costello. Let me go first. Okay, good presentation, 17 minutes. Ramon and Jason took most of the time, and Colin and Jarrett not as much, and that's okay. I'm going to assume Colin's there seeing him. Ramon and Jason took way more than we programmed. This presentation is going to be too long if I try to do as much time as they did, so you really truncated. So good job. Good job on time management. Okay. Your organization was good. The decision matrix I thought was pretty good. Yeah, your slides are easy to read. I also noted a lack of images that could have helped you. Let me see here. Your presentation style was all really good, and I would even say improved from last time. Did y'all all review your previous presentation and turning yourself critique? Jarrett, what one thing did you think you needed to improve on from your last one?
I wanted to be more aware of what to do. The last time I was watching, pointed to things on the slide, and I know that like once I got to right here, they couldn't see my arm anymore, so I wasn't even pointing there.
Okay, good. All right, I'd love to ask all of you that question, but hopefully you all kind of took something away from the self-critique. We found that that's a really valuable tool. And this one is graded. I mean, it's completion grade, but hopefully you'll, look at each of your presentations and try to improve every time. I still watch my presentations, my classroom presentations, and try to figure out what can I do better. All right. So good. Jason, your voice and presence was good. Colin, you were just a little bit quiet, probably because your mask is really heavy, so you're going to have to speak louder to overcome that. Could you guys hear Colin okay? Let me ask Rebecca. Could you hear Colin okay on the presentation?
I could hear him okay.
Okay, just okay. All right. So let me throw some darts here. Ramon, on your flow analysis, remember one of the things I've talked about pretty heavily is on your flow analysis, we need to focus on quantity. So water. How much water is available in the system currently?
Well, we have the pond of we have the kind of impounded water.
Right. What is your estimate of how many gallons is available there? Yeah, your flow analysis didn't have a single number in it, okay, and that's not good. Okay, I think I harped on that a lot. So what you're looking for is, yeah, you hit the concepts well, but that's qualitative. And so what you need is, all right, currently what we have is we've got this pond, and it's this size, so we estimate it has this much volume of water in it. And that's useful information when you're trying to figure out which crop you're going to plant, how much water it's going to demand. And then you figure out what the delta is, either whatever your sources of water. The flow analysis is not just to consider, okay, I'm going to plant some seeds and I'm going to harvest something. For cotton, what expected yield would you have, and then how much seed are you going to plant, that kind of stuff. Not just, there are going to be some laborers flowing through the system, there are going to be some harvesters flowing through the system. You need to really hit the quantitative aspects of this. So that was lacking. Your potential solutions. The instructions on your potential solutions are that they all need to stand alone. What you have is the classic error that all of our students make. I guess I'm not teaching this very well because every year we have this problem. There are not three separate potential solutions here. You've talked about the components of each solution, but source of irrigation water in itself is not a solution, not a potential solution. So what we're looking for here is, and you kind of have to figure out what is going to drive the rest of the solution, because you don't want to create these stovepipes where, okay, we're going to decide on we're going to do a water well, and we're going to do a diesel generator, and we're going to plant corn. Okay, those are not integrated. Part of systems management, which is a pretty important part of your degree, is an integrated systems approach, not all these disassociated aspects of it. Exactly. Yeah. So let's do a little talking here on. You've got a lot of the components there. You've done the consideration. Now you need to take it to the next step and say, all right. So let's take all these different choices and let's come up with a what we consider to be a low cost solution. What would be the lowest cost solution? It's probably going to result in lower yields. But here's the one that has the least amount of input. So what would that look like? Now let's come up with a different solution that would be, what would be the most, what solution would produce the highest yield? Okay, that's going to drive you to some different choices with regard to crops, irrigation source, energy, that kind of thing. So you need to take this, what you've got here, and give the client 3 standalone solutions to choose from. And that's what your decision matrix needs to evaluate. Now, so you've got several variables here. I think there are at least 4. Source of irrigation water, method of irrigation, source of energy, crops, right? So of those 4, which one of them is going to be the driver of the other 3 in the solution? Probably the crop that you select, okay? For example, if you select wheat, it may consume a lot more water than sesame. And so maybe your high yield solution would be the wheat crop, and that's going to drive the other aspects of your solution. See what I mean? So you need to come up with 3 integrated solutions, not just a bunch of different stovepipes that are not related to one another. Okay?
Like one solution would be diesel generation, pumping water out of the well, and
irrigating these crops. Exactly. Yeah. And then a second solution would be something completely different. And that way you have 3 standalone solutions that you can compare and recommend one of them to your client. You may recommend the most economical one, and he may look at your analysis and go, yeah, that's good, but I'm not afraid to spend a little more money, so I'm going to pick the one that's going to be the most expensive one because I really want that high yield. Okay, and really, right now you haven't done that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop there because that's really the main problem with your presentation. You've got some good options. You just need to integrate them. Okay, Dr. Castell.
Yeah, I agree with what Professor McGee had said exactly. I think on the potential crop solution, I really like the description, the explanation was very good, but it was all over the place. So maybe a table highlighting the variables that are more critical. I think that was missing for me. Even though the explanation was great, but the slides itself don't support what you're saying. So I think a table summarizing what you're addressing would have helped a little bit. So that can support what Professor Mikey said. Ramon, your slides are good. I like the diagram, but it has different colors and you did not explain what it meant. So why the red and green? If you're gonna use the picture, use it, right? And otherwise, I didn't understand why was there, right? It's the water flow. So use your picture a little better. Picture help. I think that was missing in the slide. Ramon, you spent some time on a faculty meeting and you show a picture of that. I think you could have used that presentation time with the quantitative aspects of the flow analysis. So, and I don't know what a faculty meeting is. It's Dr. Kingman's meeting. Who were those people in the
Yeah, it was good.
I did not see it. So anyway, there's no need to highlight, even though Dr. Kingman is great and I know that he helped you a lot. That used a lot of the time for the quantitative aspect of the presentation, which I think is the most important. Just use the time better. Delivery was great. You overcame the math issues from the last time. And your decision matrix, I would have liked a footnote, but I see Rebecca had the same question I had with what does this numbers mean? So just make it self-explanatory so I don't have to ask that question. And you said you're going to meet an agronomist. I assume you know who the person is, so the name of the person, right? We're going to meet an agronomist. So a little more details on that. Overall, good flow. Yeah, looking forward to the details for the next presentation. Good job.
Any comments, Young?
That was pretty good.
Again, I hit you pretty hard on the content, but the overall goal of this class is to make you comfortable delivering oral presentations. You will do that. Some of you are going to do it more than others. So you're going to be doing that if you're in any sort of a leadership somewhere, which you probably will all be. And I'm very happy that so far you all seem pretty comfortable. Okay, so learning objective achieved. The content, this is you can work on that, but ultimately, after the class is over, and hopefully Mr. Rainey is happy with your project, you will have accomplished the goal of coming up with, organizing, and presenting oral presentations, and you're doing great. Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Rainey?